Tomorrow is International Day of Forests, and while we celebrate the beauty of forests across the globe, it's also a chance for us to have a sober look at what we're doing to the forests of Australia. And I can tell you, it is not a pretty sight. But we have a choice. We can let our forests be destroyed, allowing clear fell logging of forests and broad-scale clearing of woodlands, or we can halt the destruction of our native forests and make sure that they are intact for future generations to come. Australians, we're rightly proud of our incredible natural landscapes. Our island home is a tapestry of wonders, from the Great Barrier Reef, the vibrant landscapes of Kakadu, the incredible beaches and coasts, and the charm of our gorgeous native wildlife. Selfies with quokkas in WA are a global hit for a very good reason. There's nothing quite like a cute Aussie creature. But the stewardship of our natural places and wildlife is failing. We are failing to protect and to restore nature, and we're losing precious parts of our natural heritage, potentially for good. Future generations will ask us, how did you let this happen? I want us to act so that we don't have to look our grandkids in the eye and just answer with a shrug. On International Day of Forests, we have to recognise that here in Australia, we are managing our forests with very little regard to their values, their many values to us. I've been lucky enough to spend a lot of time in our forests, particularly in my home state of Victoria. And I know, like anybody else in this place knows, who has visited a pristine forest, how invigorating it is to breathe in the fresh air, to look up at the awesome, amazing trees, to marvel at the ferns and the mosses, and to hear cascades of fresh water, fresh enough, clean enough to drink straight out of creeks and rivers. I mean, most Aussies would assume that we had left the worst of our knock it down, ship it out logging practices in the last century. But the truth is, the native forest logging industry is still running rampant in forests like these. And Victoria takes the cake for the most destruction. There are more logs coming out of Victorian native forests than there are from Tasmania, Senator McKim, on latest figures. And most of these logs end up as wood chips. And just think about that for a moment. We are razing forests to the ground that include trees that are hundreds of years old, that are the habitat of an amazing diversity of plants and animals, that provide us with clean air and water, largely for wood chips. This is absolute madness. And all this despite the fact that we now have plantations providing about almost 90% of the wood being produced in Australia, providing wood without destroying our natural heritage. For a clear-felled native forest, it takes well over 100 years for that forest to return to how it was before logging, if all goes to plan. But the plan is to log it again well before then, anyway. There are those in this place, including our current minister responsible for forests, who say our native forests are put there for our taking, that we can cut big old trees down and presume that they'll just magically reappear in their original form in the landscape. But what happens to the balance of the ecosystem in the meantime? What happens to the clean air, the clean water and the habitat these trees provide? What happens to the visitors going for a nice drive? Do they wait 100 years before wait for the trees to return to their glory, before they can spend their tourist dollars in our regional communities? But surely we have laws to protect our forests, I hear you say. You may be interested to learn what happens under our national logging laws, the regional forest agreements, when a forest-dwelling species is identified as having become threatened or endangered. The answer? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. When a species is listed as threatened under our federal environment laws, nothing happens in terms of changing logging practices. It's carry on, business as usual. And meanwhile, Australia has the highest rate of animal extinctions in the entire world. The highest rate of animal extinctions in the entire world. The 10 regional forest agreements across Australia have been in place for 20 years, and they were meant to balance the needs of a sustainable logging industry with protecting our forests. They have failed on nearly every account, leaving industry uncertainty as wood runs out and leaving our forests in a precarious state. And the Turnbull government is committed to simply rolling over these destructive laws for another 20 years. The Greens, in stark contrast, think that the regional forest agreements should be scrapped. The sad case of greater gliders is just one example of how they have failed. Greater gliders are gliding possums, about the size of a cat. They've got a luxurious fluffy coat and big teddy bear-like ears. They feed exclusively on the leaves, buds and flowers of eucalyptus and are active at night, gliding up to 100 metres from tree to tree. They spend most of their days asleep in one of their many dens that they create in hollows in old trees, with up to 20 of these dens spread across their territory of between 1 to 4 hectares. 2 decades ago, greater gliders were abundant along the east coast, but a combination of land clearing, logging and the rising threat of bushfires linked to climate change has caused their population to crash. They were listed as vulnerable on the federal list of threatened and endangered species in 2016, but that has prompted absolutely no action from the federal government. Clear felling of the forests, including the old trees where greater gliders live, has continued unabated. Our logging laws say that if logging is occurring under an area covered by a regional forest agreement, then the states and the federal government have a full 3 years before they even need to begin working on a plan that might do something about reducing the impacts of that logging. But that plan, known as a recovery plan, is likely to be vague and compromised, and it won't even be legally enforceable. It's not just greater gliders, of course. We have critically endangered Leadbeater's possums and critically endangered swift parrots, whose habitat was clear fell logged in Tasmania late last year, dismaying scientists who are trying to protect them. There are only about 2,000 swift parrots left. They have a recovery plan. However, it only refers vaguely to encouraging and supporting the protection, conservation management and restoration of swift parrot nesting and foraging habitat through agreements with landowners, incentive programs and community projects. It doesn't specify the limits to the loss of habitat, either through clearing on the Australian mainland or through the logging of the bird's critical habitat in Tasmania. And Australia is one of the worst offenders globally when it comes to broad-scale land clearing and deforestation. In fact, it's the only developed country listed as a global deforestation hotspot. The rate of clearing of forests and woodlands by landholders is rising, especially in Australia's north, and the effects are devastating. The bulldozers go in, they leave native wildlife dead or without a home, and they destroy massive amounts of carbon-storing vegetation. The sharp rise in land clearing has been driven by weakening of state laws and ineffective federal laws, allowing landholders to clear vast swathes of forested land. As we march through the 21st century, with logging and land clearing still continuing, the important role of forests and woodlands as carbon stores combating dangerous global warming has become ever clearer. We Australians like to think of ourselves as a modern, sophisticated nation. So on International Day of Forests, the question must be asked, will we continue the destruction of our precious forests for such little gain, or will we act to protect them and restore nature for future generations? In this place and in this Parliament, we must not squib this one. The choice is ours.